Good morning. I think they underestimated the amount of time my short legs might take to make it across the stage. Professor Schwartz, good morning. As we can see here, you are not with us. You are unfortunately unable to be here in chilly Chicago with us this morning. But I wanted to begin by asking you sort of the fundamental question of my day, because I think you are the one person truly qualified to explain to me why I got out of bed this morning.
Well, I wrote a book about this, and there's an assumption that characterizes most modern workplaces, which is that people work for pay. And that's the end of the story. Now, it's certainly true that people wouldn't work if they didn't get paid, but this neglects so many other aspects of what gets us out of bed in the morning. We want work that engages us. We want work that challenges us. We want work where we have some control over what we do. Most important, we want work that's meaningful, that we think makes some small difference in other people's lives. A lot of people trade salary for these attributes of work and find it increasingly difficult to find any of them in the work they have to do. So as for you, I don't know why you got out of bed in the morning.
Oh, well, now I'm still missing my answer. But there is that question, you know, what does work mean? What does compensation mean? How are we truly compensated? And in some sense, I think, you know, we look today, of course, there's some sort of minimal level of which we need to be compensated at some salary level, right? Each of us has some sort of magic number. But there's also that sense of some higher compensation, some experience that you need to have to feel engaged in both your work or the organization or your industry. You need to feel that you have some purpose.
No, I think that's absolutely right. The notion that you sometimes hear that if we're too generous with unemployment benefits, people will just sit home, you know, watch soap operas and eat chips, is preposterous. People want to feel like they make a difference in the world. Enabling the people who work in our organizations to feel that way. Gallup polls workplace satisfaction on a regular basis and finds that approximately 90% of people worldwide are either unengaged or actively disengaged from their work. So 1 in 10 of us get out of bed in the morning eager to go to our jobs, and that's just tragic.
One in 10 of us are just wondering what we're doing, right?
1 in 10 of us know what we're doing.
Know what we're doing. Then 90% of us don't know what we're doing, right?
Exactly.
So I think about this, and it can be applied to, I mean, I can understand how there's certain intellectual jobs that you would think, okay, I understand how that person feels a sense of purpose. Maybe you're in the medical profession and you're saving a life. Maybe you are, but if you don't have, if the nature of your work does not allow that one-to-one correlation, where I'm an emergency medical tech and I'm going out and I'm going to save somebody's life today, how can I identify? How can I identify with my work?
So a colleague of mine named Amy Resniewski studied hospital janitors, and most of the people in the audience probably know that these are the invisible people, the lowest of the low in the hospital hierarchy. And some of them are just punching a clock and doing this very long list of chores. But some of them believe that their job is to help in the curing of disease and easing of suffering, that they have an essential role to play. And when you talk to them, when you interview them, they talk about lots of things they do that are not in their job description, and how much skill it takes and experience it takes to know how to do the job well, when to step in, when to comfort a patient, when to get help, and stuff like that. And this is a low-level, quote, low-level, unskilled job. So it really has to do with buying into the mission of the organization and feeling like you're treated as somebody who makes an invaluable contribution. And, you know, the truth is, if janitors didn't do their jobs well, hospital-based infections would be 3 times higher than they already are, and they're already a serious problem. So I don't think you need to be a high-tech or a worker or a cardiac surgeon to get to feel that what you do is meaningful and significant.
You know, that reminds me of a story which might be apocryphal, but I recall hearing this, that when John F. Kennedy visited NASA, or I think it was Kennedy's, well, what became the Kennedy Space Center, but when he visited, he met a man who was a custodian in the hallway, and he didn't know this. He reached out, shook his hand, and said, "What do you do here?" And he said, "Oh, I help to put people on the moon."
No, that's exactly
and you
right.
have to have that
relationship. Version of this story about a bricklayer who says, "I build cathedrals." And you know, a little of this is probably self-deceptive, but you can easily imagine a work environment where the bricklayer feels like all I'm doing is putting one stone on top of another, and another work environment where the bricklayer legitimately feels I'm building a cathedral. Without me, there would be no cathedral. Without me, there would be no man on the moon. So how do you create an organization where everyone feels like he or she plays an essential role in the organization's purpose? And how do you build an organization that actually has a purpose?
But how did we get to this point where we think that work is about compensation over that sense of identity?
Well, you know, I at least trace it to the father of market economics, Adam Smith, who really seemed to have this attitude toward people as workers, which is that they were basically lazy by nature, and the only thing that would get them to do anything was pay. And if you paid them and paid them properly, what you had them do didn't matter. So his famous story about a pin factory, where you take a simple task like making straight pins and divide it up into 500 subtasks to gain an efficiency, it's as good a job as any other, because the only reason people show up is for the paycheck. So that started 250 years ago, and increasingly, as the assembly line process kicked in and mass production and division of labor became the way places operated, this became the only model we have of what work is like. And when we went from manufacturing to service work, you see it in call centers where people are timed for how long each call takes, not for whether they actually, you know, solve the caller's problems. So it's just a pervasive kind of ideology that's 250 years old and is just false. It's not true of what people want, and it doesn't produce good work. It produces bad work.
Well, then let's talk about where we are in technology today. We've been talking a little bit about this morning, about the impact of technology, particularly as we look at AI. I keep reading these articles that say AI is going to kill your job, right? At some point, this is supposed to actually help us as human beings. If AI can replace part of my workday, then I have more free time to explore other things. Maybe we need to reconsider what work is.
Well, you know, I think that's true, and I've thought a fair amount about this, what's, I guess, called the gig economy, where people get to pick and choose when they work and what work they do, and a lot of people think this is, you know, potentially quite liberating. I have some doubts about it. First, I'm not sure that it will enable enough people to actually earn a living, and I haven't heard anyone say anything convincing about how we're going to manage to employ people in a world where people become increasingly unnecessary to the jobs. But the other thing about the gig economy that troubles me, and it partly depends on how it plays out, is its virtue is you get to do what you want to do. You don't want the job, you don't take it. That's a good thing. But you're not working for a company, which means that you're almost certainly going to be asked to do the same thing again and again by the different people who employ you. You don't have a chance to develop new skills except on your own time and with your own dime, because the company isn't going to finance you learning something new. It expects you to deliver something. Probably there's going to be very low tolerance for mistakes, since you're being paid to do a job, which means less risk-taking and less development. And finally, you don't have any allegiance to an organization, which means that it's a lot harder to find purpose and meaning in what you do. So, you know, it sort of depends on how the gig economy ends up evolving, but I see it really not as enabling people to do work that they care more about at all. It's probably going to leave them feeling increasingly dislocated and increasingly like the only reason for working is to get a paycheck.
Are there metrics that can indicate, that can prove to us whether that's true so far as we've started to see this develop?
I don't know. There may be. Certainly there's a lot of attention being paid to it. What I've read, the attention is more on measures of things like productivity and less on measures of satisfaction. And the other thing is it's a moving target. What would bother me about not working for an organization might not bother a 22-year-old for whom this is the new normal. And it's quite possible that people will develop new ways to make meaning out of their work that people of my generation can't even imagine. So I think it's way too early to judge whether this new incredibly flexible relation between workers and the work they do will end up really being a benefit. It's too soon to tell.
You have worked obviously with college students for a long time. Do you want to lift the veil over their eyes if they have a reason to be looking more carefully at this? I mean, I have to think when I talk to young people getting out of school, they seem to be much more comfortable with this idea as you suggested. But do you want somehow to say to them, stop and think about what this really means for the life of your career?
Yes, I would like them to think about it. You know, we do such a good job encouraging people, college students, to feel completely independent, completely in charge of their fate and their destiny, that I think they underappreciate the importance of institutional membership. They think they can essentially invent the world they want to live in, each of them for themselves. And in this, I'm afraid they're mistaken. But I've taught at Swarthmore College, which has wonderful, wonderful, talented, motivated students. I did it for 45 years, and I have yet to figure out a way of convincing any young person in advance that my view is the one they should take seriously. Their view is in some way incomplete. I think they'll learn it for themselves. What's nice is that they get out with such skill and a fair amount of willingness to take chances. So that if they get knocked to the floor a few times, they'll pick themselves up and they'll eventually, most of them, at any rate, find an equilibrium. But I find that dire warnings from 70-year-olds are just a waste of breath.
Well, we will remind them to listen to you as we have today. Professor, thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you very much.